I went to school and I was taught that there were 3 synoptic gospels.
Yeah.
What are you talking about a 4th synoptic gospel?
Well, for a start, it's quite provocative. I like the idea of being provocative. People are more likely to pick it up if you're provocative, but I do believe it. I do believe it. Because here's the thing. Every day that I was writing this book, I picked up a gospel synopsis, which is a book that puts the gospels in parallel columns. And do you know what? How many columns are in there? 4.
3. Oh, yeah,
4.
well, there's 4, but it's always Matthew, Mark, and Luke, right?
But here's the thing.
Right.
Okay, I'm mucking about a little bit.
Okay.
Most of the time it's 3.
Yeah. But they always do put the John over there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've got all these, and so I started thinking, well, hold on a minute. Therefore, John sometimes is synoptic. By definition, if he's a 4th column in the book, he's sometimes synoptic.
Sure.
So then you ask the question, are there any places where he's closer to one of the others than they are to each other? And there are loads of them. I'll give you an example, the anointing story.
Right.
John is closer to Matthew and Mark than Luke is. So you've got Matthew, Mark, John, really, really similar in the anointing story. And you've got Luke over here. So there, John is more synoptic than Luke.
Okay.
So why not just say, hey, look at him being synoptic?
Well, yeah, but that's not what I was taught, right?
No, exactly.
Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the synoptic gospels.
Yeah.
And they tell all these stories that John doesn't tell. And John tells all these significant stories that the synoptics don't tell. Right. So there are 3 synoptics, and John's not a synoptic.
Well, I tell you what I think's happened here.
Okay.
I've taught that myself for 20, 30 years.
Right.
I do, and I spend like ages in class. This is how different John is. He's so different. Even in the feeding of the 5,000, even the word for bread and fish is different. You know, I mean, like he's just so different because I want them to get that in their heads.
Right.
The problem is, a lot of us, we do this, we do it in our New Testament introductions, but then we start believing our own rhetoric.
Yeah, sure.
You know, we basically start believing it so much that we actually start reading it through the lens of that pedagogy.
Right.
And I started saying, well, John isn't that different. I mean, yeah, he's different. I mean, let's face it, Luke is also very, very different from Mark and Matthew.
This is true.
And so maybe John's just like on a kind of spectrum where you've got Matthew and Mark. I think Matthew's really close to Mark. Very similar.
Yeah, sure.
But then you've got Luke here, and then John's like over here somewhere. So, and difference is always a question of degree. It's not absolute. There's, you know, it's not like kind of, well, you've got these Gospels that are synoptic and John isn't. It's a question of degree.
Degrees, yeah.
So
on a spectrum.
So that's really, exactly. Yeah. It's always a spectrum. That's what I'm kind of getting at with this.
Yeah, it's almost like you're listening to your own rhetoric, kind of like you would be, with, let's say, with Q.
Yeah.
Because I was taught a certain thing with Q, and then I read your book on Q, and I was like, oh wait, maybe we got to think something different.
Yeah.
So you're saying the same thing might be true about John.
Exactly, yeah.
I remember the story about Malchus, the high priest's servant, and the cutting off of the ear.
Yeah.
This is another example of this, correct?
It's a beautiful example of where John is synoptic. So this is the arrest story. If you go to the mainstream synopsis that all gospel scholars use by Allant, 4 columns, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and you can lay them side by side. And do you know what? There's Matthew-Mark agreements. There's Matthew-Luke agreements. There are Mark-John agreements. There are John-Luke agreements. Let me give you one example. Right. Which ear was it? So Luke and John, right ear. Matthew and Mark's just the ear.
Right.
All right, it's a little thing, but you've got an agreement between Luke and John. Matthew has Jesus saying, put away your sword. He struck the thing, put your sword away, put it back in its sheath. John has that too. So you start looking at it thinking, hold on a minute, John's got agreements with just Matthew and just Mark and just Luke and with 2 of them and then 3 of them. So I thought, well, so in fact, I had this chapter, it was called When John is Synoptic. And it was all about cases like this.
Right.
And basically my publisher said, can we go a bit more provocative here and just go full synoptic gospel? And I went, okay, sure. Because it's true, it's true. And it's one of those things where, look, I'm not actually proposing that we change the word. I'm not proposing that we start saying from now on there are 4 synoptic gospels. Right. Although if someone wants to talk me into it,
it'll sell.
Do,
yeah.
But no. So that's really the thing. And you know, I mean, if people only read the title and they won't get the nuances, and you'll realize that I actually am saying in the book, yeah, there's tons of differences.
Sure.
But I think the differences are rooted in a really fundamental, basic literary conceit. That's the same.